What is up, Ethan Mo gamers? Today I'll be ranking every official Virtual Boy game, which includes 22 games in the library and 2 games that were finished but did not see the light of day, although were eventually discovered so you can still play them. And I did make sure to actually beat all of these games without the use of save states or rewind or whatever. Why, you ask? Well, I guess I'm just a curious fellow. But I'm also a believer that there's fun to be found in pretty much any game console library, and even though everyone says this thing sucks, I've actually developed an appreciation for the device. However, not all of these games were made equally, which we will see. Starting with Golf. Now this probably isn't the worst game in the library, but it is my most hated, and everything here is ranked by my personal enjoyment. If I played all of these games for 30 minutes or something, this would certainly not be in this spot, and I mean most people that have made videos like this probably played these games for much less than 30 minutes, or perhaps not at all. But like I said, I did beat all of these games, and this was by far the most torture. So much resetting and entering passwords over and over to try and get a good score because you need to get at least a -6 finish to beat it. But the timing in this game is so weird. I mean, what the heck even is this, man? This combined with the win makes me think that this is pretty much impossible to finish number 1 on the leaderboard without resets. And the constant resets just makes this not enjoyable whatsoever. I've just never played a golf game with such strict timing, and anytime I got an acceptable score, almost always felt like it was just because I got lucky. I've just never played a golf game where things feel as out of my control as this one. And a lot of the time it's hard to tell what I'm even looking at or the distance I am from the hole, probably because this is a 3D game on the Virtual Boy. I also think music is pretty important for a golf game, so it would have been nice if the music was better, and if there is more than just one music track, you might simply opt to turn it off entirely, since it got irritating to me pretty quickly. But I probably didn't do a good job at convincing you that this is the worst game in the library, which is fine, it's just my opinion, but I'd be lying if I said this wasn't my most hated. Next up is Virtual Lab, and unlike Golf, this falling block puzzle game doesn't even work correctly, and is pretty universally considered to be the worst game in the library. It was a game made in just 8 days by one person, on development equipment they had never even used before. I don't really know why this is the case because the Virtual Boy had been out for months already, so it's not like this was going to be a launch title, but since it came out in December, I guess they wanted it out for the holiday season. But then again, this game came out only in Japan, and they don't seem to go as wild for gifts over there, so I don't know. Maybe it's more likely that this came out in December because they knew Nintendo was planning to end the Virtual Boy permanently in the same month in Japan, but why did J-Wing, the publisher, even want this game made at that point? Was there logic that there would be guaranteed sales because it's one of the only games in the library? Well, unsurprisingly, they didn't produce many copies of it, which is probably why it's the most expensive Virtual Boy game by far at $1,500. Is it worth it for a falling block puzzle game that doesn't even work correctly? Basically in Virtual Lab you're trying to close off these intestine things. Weird, I know. And I do mean trying because this game has actual unsolvable configurations. These pieces end up just being stuck and you can't do anything about them, unless you manage to summon a fairy by forming a large intestine, which of course, pulling this off you're still at the mercy of the game's RNG and whatever pieces it feels like giving to you. This fairy also only ends up clearing the bottom row, but playing this game optimally, especially on the later levels, involves just resetting over and over until it gives you the pieces you can actually work with. You want to see how I started this game? Very impressive play by me. Other people's first level may look something like this. Now this game isn't actually beatable, there's no ending although it gives you passwords. One small problem though, they didn't actually give you anywhere to input these passwords because the game is incomplete. To try and distract you from the fact that the game is unfinished and doesn't work correctly, they made sure to include a girl on the side of the screen with humongous 3D honkadonkers, which is not a very surprising addition when the same developer previously made some adult video games for Hacker International. But unfortunately this does nothing to elevate the game, but I also think she's probably the only thing anyone actually remembers from this game, because without her it'd just be intestines. The same developer did something similar by putting this girl on the title screen of their Game Boy game Chiki Chiki Tengoku, another falling block puzzle game, and this game overall looks to be much more functional because it doesn't use these intestine tubes. Maybe this concept was a little too ambitious given the mere 8 days to develop the game, and they could have maybe done something more standard like making a matching 3 falling block puzzle game, which we may or may not see later in this video. But I have no doubt Virtual Lab could have been a much better game, with more time and resources of course, but of course when you only have one person and just 8 days, it was never going to be feasible. Next up is another sports game, Virtual League Baseball. This game is probably worse than Golf. I mean, if you try to play this game normally, you're in for a bad time. Well, actually you're in for a bad time no matter what. It's hard to tell what you're even looking at when fielding. I don't know how they managed to regress so much from the 8-bit platforms in this regard on a 32-bit machine. This makes it really difficult to simply catch a ball. Could they really not have done more than 2 camera views for this game? Yeah, that's all you get, just these two. It's hard to tell which of your fielders are covering and which you're actually controlling, which causes you to drop what should be really easy outs. Probably the most egregious thing about this game are the blatantly cheating computer players that you play against that do everything perfectly. I mean, these guys feel genuinely impossible at first, but I eventually found that this game is actually easily solvable. As you can tell from the footage here, if I pitched in a specific way every time, the computer couldn't do anything about it, and if I timed the bunt a certain way by hitting it last second and holding left, they would take forever to get the ball, and I could get bases loaded very easily doing this. But even if you manage to figure out how to do this yourself, you'll find that the game is still really long and really boring. You gotta go through a league of 8 games to see the ending, and I immediately turned off the music, which the in-game music is a 23-second loop, so you're guaranteed to get sick of it very quickly. I think I'll take just about any baseball game over Virtual League Baseball. I'll even take Virtual League Baseball 2. That's right, there is a sequel in development, but it was never released. The idea of a Virtual Boy game getting a sequel is comical, but of all the games to receive one, Virtual League Baseball, really? Well, Kemco seem to love pumping out sequels for their successful games, actually. Just take a quick look at their Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Hugo, Garfield, The Real Ghostbusters, Roger Rabbit, Woody Woodpecker, Kid Clown, Crazy Castle series. But did Virtual League Baseball really perform that well? It may have actually, seeing as it's the second cheapest game in the library after Mario's Tennis. It's hard to believe that a developer actually benefited from releasing a game on the Virtual Boy, but unfortunately for Kemco, this was short-lived. Waterworld. I won't have much to say about this one because I've never watched this movie. All I know is that it was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, and just like the Virtual Boy, it's remembered as a flop, although still has its fans. There's no ending or anything, it's an infinite game taking place on an infinite ocean, so who better to get to develop the game than Ocean? But yeah, holy cow is this game bare bones. It's just a high score chasing game that is pretty much immediately boring. You just go around and shoot these pirates and that's it. This game is also depressing to simply look at, seeing as the entirety of the sky and ocean are pitch black. But can you blame them for not putting in any effort here? Imagine you were tasked with making a game based on a movie that proved to be a flop for a system that had already proven to be a flop. I mean, the Virtual Boy would be discontinued in Japan the very next day after this game came out. They knew this game was destined for failure no matter what. However, this game does have one saving grace, which is that its music was done by the excellent composer Jonathan Dunn, who you might know also did the legendary title theme music for RoboCop on Game Boy. Space Invaders Virtual Collection. This is one I don't even really want to talk about, because there isn't much to say. Whenever these classic arcade games get brought to consoles, it always feels like filler in the library, an easy way to add a game because they're often easy to recreate. But Space Invaders feels especially primitive to me, probably because it's a game from the 70s. This thing was disappointing when it came out on Game Boy, although it was clearly the correct move for Taito, because it still managed to sell over 1 million copies. So they figured they'd bring it over to Game Boy's failed successor soon after, and I'm curious how much this sold compared to the Game Boy version, perhaps just 1% as much, because this is surprisingly one of the more expensive games in the library, but I do have to say I don't recommend you get this one. Not only are there countless other ways of playing Space Invaders, but also even though this says collection in the title, there aren't many titles here. You get Space Invaders, the sequel Space Invaders Part 2, which is almost identical to the original game, and I really have no idea what the heck the point of playing this on Virtual Boy is when it looks like every other version of the game, only red and black. But most notably we have Virtual 3D mode. This does indeed play like Space Invaders, hooray. But you know, it might be a testament to Space Invaders' popularity and influence that it's the sole arcade port in the library. We didn't get Pac-Man, Frogger, or I guess even more modern titles at the time like Street Fighter 2, although someone was cool enough to make a homebrew of that eventually. We only got the one and only Space Invaders, which became a billion-dollar franchise off a single arcade release. There's also a challenge mode where you can do time attack and score attack as well, but this has got to be one of the saddest game collections I've ever seen. Moving on to stuff that makes me less sad, okay, well, probably not. SD Gundam Dimension War was the last Virtual Boy game to be released in Japan, and what a sad note to go out on, because this barely feels like a video game. Wikipedia may consider this to be a tactical role-playing game, but there are no RPG mechanics in this game. If there is a level system or something, I seem to have missed it, which is not a good sign. This is just a turn-based strategy game on a grid, except there's no actual strategy. It appears to be impossible to lose. When I first started playing this game, I couldn't even tell what I was looking at, or which units were mine, but that didn't seem to matter as I was able to win easily anyway, although I was eventually able to tell which units were mine. The grid-based map is so unpleasant to look at, and it doesn't help that there's no movement here at all. No animation, no nothing. I really feel like this is a game you should simply play in the background for the mind-numbing 3-hour duration. which is what I did. I was watching YouTube, but playing this on the actual Virtual Boy, you don't have that luxury since it demands your full attention because your eyes have to be inside a damn Virtual Boy. This game's got two different kinds of attack: indirect, which allows you to fire safely from a distance, and regular attack where you get up close and personal with the enemy, trying to dodge their projectiles while also trying to shoot them yourself. You can go from the foreground to the background in these fights, and this was so unenjoyable to play that I ended up doing the indirect attacks more often, and I'm not sure which is better. Direct attacks do more damage, but indirect attacks take a lot less time. This is only important to know because the less time you spend playing this game, the better. In all honesty, maybe it deserves to be lower, but I didn't find myself hating this one. It helps that it was much shorter than it could have been, however I was still bored to tears. Maybe I was watching banger YouTube videos in the background or something, which ended up elevating its ranking in this video. Virtual Fishing is another really boring game that was also a Japan exclusive. As you might know, they have a lot of fishing games over there. This one is around the same length as the previous game, at a little over 3 hours, and is equally mind-numbing. You just need to catch more fish than the computer opponents in an 8-minute time frame to earn the trophy for that area, rinse and repeat for all the different locations. Each competition has only one kind of fish to catch, which means all you have to do is learn the timing for that specific fish when yanking the rod. The most action you'll find in this game is when you're reeling in a fish, but all you need to do is reel when the fish isn't fighting back, which you can tell they're doing depending on the audio. Like I said, this is another one that was so boring to me. I played it in the background while watching YouTube once again. Just like the Gundam game, it's merely a time sink of the same almost identical repeat content over and over until you reach the end and wonder why you wasted your life. At least in my case, it was to make a video on the Virtual Boy. Nestor's Funky Bowling is a game notorious for being the worst bowling game on the Virtual Boy. The better bowling game was Japan exclusive, while this game was a North American exclusive, probably because it features the character Nestor and his twin sister Hester from the Nintendo Power comics. The existence of this game is just kinda puzzling. A character nobody cares about got himself his own game on a system no one cares about. Did they realize that the discontinuation of the Virtual Boy in Japan meant that Virtual Bowling wouldn't have a chance to release in the United States, thereby allowing them to monopolize the bowling genre on the Virtual Boy in the US? Or did they think this game was guaranteed to sell because the only owners of the Virtual Boy are Nintendo superfans who most definitely read the Nintendo Power comics? I'm just trying to make sense of this. The Virtual Boy would be discontinued in America just a month later, and I don't think anyone thought this game was going to help the system. They didn't try here at all. The game is extremely bare bones, and there is much more effort put into the other bowling game that exists on the system that we have yet to see. NikoChan Battle is the unreleased Virtual Boy version of Faceball 2000, a game known for revolutionizing the first-person shooter genre, introducing deathmatch combat into gaming on the Atari ST in 1987. I don't know how it ended up with the name NikoChan Battle though. I guess that was going to be the Japanese name of the game, since Faceball 2000 never released over there on other platforms. The playable version of this game is definitely a prototype, however, because despite having 4 different worlds, the levels feel the exact same from one another. So if you're going to play this, I recommend just doing one world and ignoring the other 3. It's really just the same exact content. This is quite different from the Game Boy version I've played, which has a whopping 70 levels. Not only did those levels confuse me, the game was really slow with an abysmal frame rate, making it all around painful to play, so I ended up dropping it. I'm sorry if this disappoints a past viewer of mine who was a professional Faceball 2000 on Game Boy player. NikoChan Battle on Virtual Boy definitely deserves praise for greatly improving the playability though, which shouldn't come as a surprise because it's on much more powerful hardware. You get to see a map of the level while you play, and you even have the ability to strafe. The goal here is to simply kill every enemy to advance to the next level. Part of the appeal of Faceball 2000 is the multiplayer mode. One small problem though, the Virtual Boy link cable never ended up releasing because there were no multiplayer games on the system, partly because NikoChan Battle ended up getting cancelled. Maybe it's unfair to rank a game that's unfinished, but let's be honest, all the games below this were also unfinished. Virtual Bowling is known for being the best bowling game on the system, but I guess for me there isn't much of a gap between the two. In fact, if I ignored the games that didn't actually release on the system, this would be only one spot higher than Nestor's Funky Bowling. Now, Athena was a developer who made a ton of bowling games on various systems, so it shouldn't be surprising that they're able to nail it better than a developer who had never released a game before. Virtual Bowling has the advantage of having an actual ending, with its tournament mode and computer opponents, and the 3D presentation is very nice in my opinion. And this game even has replays. But this is another title in this video that is very easily solvable. If you bowl in the exact same way every time like I'm displaying in this video, it's impossible to lose, and the computers simply can't compete. So it's another game in this video that's mostly just a time sink of you doing the same exact thing over and over until the game ends. It's not like real bowling where there's much more room for human error, leading to more variation. So I guess I can't really understand the appeal of this game. Most of the time I'd much prefer to play a video game version of a sport than the sport itself, but in this case I'd rather go outside and bowl in real life. I mean, I live right next to a bowling alley. You're also at a much lower risk of eye strain, headaches, vomiting, and seizures if you choose to bowl the old-fashioned way. 3D Tetris is a ripoff of an unlicensed Tetris ripoff called Blockout, released back in 1989. Alexei Pajanov, the creator of Tetris, did not like Blockout, and as a result he would go on to make his own 3D Tetris game, Weltris. And I'm with him on this one. I don't really like this either. And the camera is constantly moving around which you have no control of yourself. I found this to be really annoying and distracting. They're just trying to make use of the 3D gimmick, as Blockout is normally strictly a top-down game. It also looks to be much faster than this, and is as a result more faithful to Tetris than the so-called 3D Tetris. It also has a really unfortunate frame rate, by the way. So yeah, I instantly lost all interest in the 3D Tetris mode. I rather just played the other Tetris on Virtual Boy, V-Tetris. The highlight of this game for me though is puzzle mode, where you place blocks in the same way that they're displayed on the side of the screen, which is constantly blinking. It's fun to guess what the shape is even supposed to be, and after you complete a shape, it displays a charming little animation as a reward. Not sure if I would be able to guess what some of these are even supposed to be if not for the text at the bottom though. It should be mentioned that this is the last North American Virtual Boy game to be released, so the last official Virtual Boy game period. It makes me wonder if marketing this as a Tetris game was a bit of a desperate move, since obviously Tetris is kind of what enabled the Game Boy to be so popular, which despite what anyone tells you, Virtual Boy was originally supposed to be a successor to the Game Boy, and also in Japan this game was going to be called Polygo Block. Maybe they added Tetris in the name because V-Tetris, an actual Tetris game by the way, never made its way outside of Japan. So just like what Nestor's Funky Bowling did with the bowling genre, they may have wanted to be the only ones with the Tetris game in the North American Virtual Boy market. Well, this was simply never going to do much for the Virtual Boy. In fact, you're probably much better off playing Blockout that released on the Atari Lynx 5 years prior. Mario Clash. You may recall the game Mario Bros. Arcade that came out over a decade before this, as it's a game that was arguably important for the evolution of the Jumpman series. Adding the legendary pipes and beloved Koopas, shell creepers? This wasn't Luigi's first appearance though, which you'll know if you watch my Game & Watch video. That was Mario Bros. Game & Watch, which is an entirely different game that came out first. But anyway, Mario Clash is a reimagining of the iconic Mario Bros. Arcade game, but it's missing a 2-player option, so that's already a bit less appealing. Now this game technically has 99 levels, but it's pretty obvious they don't expect you to play all of these, because not only is there no password or save function, but the high score will also max out at 9,999, way before you could ever make it to level 99. No save feature also means you can't save your score, so that's no good. If you were to count beating level 99 as beating the game, this is I think without question the hardest Mario game. I have no idea if anyone has even achieved this without the use of cheats, since there gets to be an impossible amount of enemies the deeper you go, which is the main difference as the level layouts don't change. What's most annoying about all the enemies is that it just makes the levels take forever to finish. If you want a taste for what these levels are like, you can start at level 40, but it doesn't let you select a level higher than that. I much prefer the core gameplay of the arcade Mario Bros. Game over this. Instead of jumping underneath enemies and kicking them, you use a pipe to go to the other side of the screen to chuck Koopa shells at the enemy, since they often won't let you attack them from the front or behind. Doing this from the other side of the level, you'll also be able to catch the shell, which will allow you to get multiple hits in, which is required to take down the later enemies. Easier said than done because there will likely be enemies trying to attack you from all sides while you're attempting to do this, so you'll often not be able to stay in one place to finish off the job. Also, even just lining up to hit an enemy is not easy. Whenever they throw in a brand new enemy, it generally just adds an extra layer of annoyance to the game, rather than an interesting challenge. I honestly just don't find the core gameplay here to be very fun, and there's nothing here that'll make you want to keep coming back. Even if there was an ending to this game, this would probably be something you'd play through once and never want to touch again. Even the controls and physics aren't there. This feels surprisingly low quality for a first-party Mario game. It's almost as though nearly every game in this library is rushed. In this case, the game may have been an afterthought. You know how the Super Mario Bros. Advance games, which are directed by the same guy as Mario Clash by the way, have the Mario Bros. Classic mode present in them? Well, originally that was going to be the same deal here, as VB Mario Land, a game that never came to be, was going to have Mario Clash as a side mode. If you watch the existing footage for Virtual Boy Mario Land, you'll see that Mario's sprite is pretty much the same. Honestly, the existing footage for Virtual Boy Mario Land didn't look very promising, and I'm not sure if that's why they ended up scrapping the game or not. I would imagine the controls and physics of the regular game were a lot better than those found in Mario Clash, since obviously they wanted to replicate the controls and physics of the arcade game. They probably scrapped Virtual Boy Mario Land for all sorts of reasons, but mainly because the system was a sinking ship, but they needed to salvage the game of what they had, and that ended up being Mario Clash. Which is really unfortunate because it's the only Mario platform game on the system, and it didn't increase interest for the system at all, because it's not very good. Which I guess makes this the worst Mario game in the library. But what's the best Mario game? Well, that has to go to Mario's Tennis. Yeah, this is not a very exciting one because there have been plenty of better Mario Tennis games to appear on various systems since then, although this is kind of the first in the series, because before this you didn't get to play as Mario himself, he was just a referee like he was in most sports games. So in a way you could say that this franchise began on Virtual Boy. Whoa, a franchise getting its start on Virtual Boy? Well, kind of. Actually, many wikis will cite this as the first Mario sports game entirely, which is kind of true if we're going off name. But obviously you had stuff like golf in the past where you do play as Mario, so, or I guess even Super Mario Kart. It really just depends on what your personal criteria is. But anyway, this is the first game to appear that I think is just average, while I really didn't like anything below this. The gameplay is serviceable, but it really just attempts to replicate tennis. Crazy, I know. Usually part of the appeal of Mario sports games for me are the special character specific abilities and whatever other BS they want to throw in there. And these sorts of things are also why I vastly prefer the Kunio sports games over traditional sports titles. And the characters definitely give this game more soul than the other sports titles on the system, but you could also replace them with just regular people, and it would make sense because the gameplay would remain the same. The content here is also lacking. You've got a singles tournament, a doubles tournament, and that's it. There's not any variety either between matches. I can't even tell if it gets any harder the further you go, and because the characters have no special abilities of their own or anything, it doesn't really matter which one you go up against. They're all the exact same. Because there's no link cable, there's not even a multiplayer option either. This game does have multiple difficulties though, and the game is a complete joke on the lowest, which is what you're watching here, but it actually feels impossible on the highest difficulties, which I'm gonna be honest I didn't bother with. But for professional Mario's Tennis players who have mastered the game, maybe it has more appeal to them. I'm just not sure how many endured the eye strain and other side effects to actually reach that level of mastery. Perhaps just one person. Not too surprising because there's now many more Mario Tennis games to play, with more content and more unique gameplay that don't require you to put your eyes into a Virtual Boy. Galactic Pinball may very well be the best pinball video game I've ever played, which isn't saying much because I don't really play pinball video games. If you know me, and by that I mean if you've seen my ranking every Game & Watch video, you'll know I put pinball dead last there, so I don't consider myself much of a fan of these types of games. But that makes it all the more impressive that Galactic Pinball ended up on the top half of this list. To beat this one you have to accumulate 50 million points, which seems impossible at first, but I found that the UFO level was by far the easiest for racking up points due to the small size, but also thanks to the skeleton guy who provides you with a ton of points if you manage to shoot the puck into his mouth. But the other 3 pinball tables are also definitely worth checking out, because there's a surprising amount to uncover here. There's even a Nintendo Easter egg on the Cosmic Table. Now this game was developed by Intelligent Systems, so you might think it's Fire Emblem, but unfortunately Fire Emblem doesn't take place in space. Although Fire Emblem Awakening was originally going to take place on Mars, unfortunately though Nintendo threatened to end the series with this title if it didn't sell at least 250,000 units, so they instead opted to play it safe while adding romance and baby mode to attract more sales. But anyway, it's actually Samus Aran's spaceship from Intelligent Systems' other game, Super Metroid, that was released just a year prior. This is pretty cool. Interestingly enough, she would get to star in her own pinball game a decade later. As much as I would like to pretend that Galactic Pinball influenced this game, a pinball game with Samus was inevitable because she often likes to turn into a ball. Despite being a Virtual Boy game, Galactic Pinball is somehow cheaper than Metroid Pinball, and I'm honestly curious about which actually sold more between these games. I think it's probably kind of close. Galactic Pinball may have the advantage of being a launch title, but the DS sold 200 times more than the Virtual Boy, and Metroid is a famous IP, so I don't know. You tell me which has the bigger advantage here. But anyway, Galactic Pinball may be the first internally developed Nintendo game to primarily use pre-rendered 3D computer graphics predating Donkey Kong Country, and the game ends up looking pretty dang good. The other games at the time had the camera follow the pinball, but in this game the whole board is visible, and it was executed quite well. You'll notice I don't have many negatives to say about this one, and the main reason it's not higher is just because, well, it's pinball, which I don't think I'll ever be able to fall in love with. Jack Bros was the first Megami Tensei game to ever be released outside of Japan, which is freaking hilarious because it's on the Virtual Boy of all things, and so is never going to be able to increase Western interest in the series. It's not hard to see why this was their first choice though, since no one would even have to know it's related to an RPG series. Everyone already knows Jack Frost, Jack Lantern, and Jack Skeleton. Yes, that is actually his name here. And also, JRPGs were rarely localized back then. And in Megami Tensei's case, it contained some things that were perhaps deemed too inappropriate for the American infant mind. They didn't have to worry about that for this game though, and it's also not an RPG at all, but a basic, easy to understand top-down dungeon crawler, although the most neat thing about this game I would say is that it's a twin-stick shooter utilizing both Virtual Boy D-pads. That's right, you couldn't get this type of gameplay on other systems at the time. I like to see it because most of the games in this library did not take advantage of having a whole other D-pad on the controller. Now this game is often cited as potentially being the best game on the system, But as it turns out, this appears to be some sort of meme or something, and people don't actually like this game all that much. The core gameplay is not too interesting. Usually I'm just walking around tapping enemies with my blade until I find some keys that I need to drop down to the next floor, which there are 60 of, and it gets to be very repetitive. You're racing against the time though, and getting hit will delete the time you have remaining. The only way to die is the time hitting 0. While having 3 different playable characters with 3 different endings sounds neat, selecting a different character doesn't actually change the game in any meaningful way. It's just a difference in DPS and having a projectile or melee attack. Unfortunately, there's just no reason I'd ever want to replay this game to see the other endings. I should probably mention that the music by Hiroyuki Inada is quite good, which I'm just now remembering because I'm listening to it for this video. I also really liked his music in Last Bible 1 and 2 on Game Boy Color. Insmouth no Yakata is a first-person shooter horror game that plays like a dungeon crawler. Apparently this is based off an H.P. Lovecraft novel, The Shadow over Innsmouth, which I'm not going to pretend I know anything about because I don't read. From what I understand, there's not really any similarities besides both featuring fish-like monsters. Now honestly, I think horror games are a fantastic fit for the Virtual Boy, so it's a shame there weren't any more, because the console itself is already quite disturbing. Besides all the side effects that require developers to put in constant break reminders, you're putting your face into this headset that features exclusively red and black colors, which just happen to be the 2 scariest colors if you think about it. You know, red indicating blood and danger, and black being the void and death. Plus, this is maybe the most isolating system ever created, with no 2-player option or multiplayer gameplay to be found. You're on your own, buddy. So for these reasons, I'm sad we never got a Metroid game on the Virtual Boy. It would have been a great fit, especially because it would provide much more detailed sprites than what you would find on Super Nintendo or GBA. Instead, Samus only appears in Galactic Pinball. But anyway, I better start talking about the actual game here. Just like Jack Bros, you're racing against the time, although this game is less forgiving, as if you don't finish the levels within a certain amount of time, you'll be locked out of some branching paths, which means you won't be able to get the best ending. There's 4 endings in total, most of which are bleak. But you'll probably end up relying a lot on RNG for the best ending, as the key locations are randomized and so are the orbs that help you find the keys. Luckily, this game gives you passwords so you can simply keep trying, but I'm not a fan of luck being such a big factor. Outside of searching for these orbs and keys, this game's got encounters with these monster fellows, and the actual combat is pretty much non-existent. So yeah, this game is really simple, because there's not even animations when you turn, but that would ruin the game's biggest strength, which is the very fast pace that allowed a dedicated player to clear it in just 4 minutes. Alright fellas, now we're really getting into the hard hitters of the Virtual Boy library. By that I mean games I enjoyed from start to finish. You could say I'm even a fan of these games. Starting with Space Squash, which is my pick for best sports game on the system, because I like sports games most when they're nothing like the sport itself. That being said, I have no idea what the heck a squash is, so I couldn't tell you how accurate this is. And I'm also starting to realize that there are a lot of Virtual Boy games that take place in space. But this is kind of like 3D Pong, and as you can see, Pong has come a long way since the Nintendo Color TV game. Oh wait, this game is 30 years old now, meaning it's quite a bit older than Pong when it released. You use the left D-pad to move around, and the right D-pad for directional shots, and you've got 4 different powers you can choose: shoot, speed, shield, and homing. They can be activated if your power meter is full. This game is as simple as it looks, but still a good time, albeit repetitive. You go through and play against all these computer opponents. These guys are really easy, by the way, but there's not really much to differentiate the levels from one another. There's branching paths, but I have no idea what difference it makes. Where this game adds variety and ramps up the difficulty though, are during the boss battles. This monkey guy I remember really annoyed me because he was so dang hard to hit. Health bars being present means you get to blow each other up, which definitely adds a fun and unique layer to this game that you likely won't see in other games in the squash genre, however many there are. And now we have the only other cancelled game to appear in this video, Bound High. Unlike NikoChan Battle though, this game actually finished development, it just never released because it was too late for the platform by that point. What's funny is Japan System Supply was originally developing a squash game that would be similar to Breakout, meaning there would have been 2 squash games and 2 bowling games on the system, which would have been really funny. But after the president of the company saw Hideyuki Nakanishi's design documents, they decided to go with this game instead. And according to Hideyuki, he forced himself to peek into the screens during the entire development of the game, and believes that the stereoscopic capability of the Virtual Boy is actually effective in training the eyeball muscles, and it doesn't actually make your vision any worse. And you know what, I'm gonna believe this guy, because he must have had his eyes in there for hundreds of hours in such a short amount of time. So I apologize for suggesting it has negative effects earlier in this video. Everyone watching this video should be sure to train their eyeballs inside a Virtual Boy every day for at least 1 hour. He also doesn't believe the peeking posture is bad for health either. According to Yamauchi, Nintendo was president at the time. Bound High was the most promising game at Famicom Space World in 1995. Keep in mind this is the same show that had prototypes for Super Mario 64, Zelda 64, and Pokemon Red and Green. This is very high praise considering this isn't even a game from one of Nintendo's internal teams. Or maybe he just wanted people to buy a Virtual Boy, because only 10 people had one. Bound High is definitely not as good as the games mentioned, but it's a solid game. Kinda reminds me of Zenith on the Philips CDI. It starts out really easy, I kinda blasted through the first 3 worlds, and I was getting worried about the low difficulty, and it's also pretty repetitive, but it picks up in World 4 and gets to be pretty challenging, mostly because of wind, which is admittedly kinda frustrating, because if I remember correctly, the direction it blows is pretty dependent on RNG. This game's got a good flow to it, and it works better than you might expect, as you can reliably jump from enemy to enemy, so long as the wind doesn't screw you over really. Just like Space Squash, the most variety you'll find comes in the form of boss fights, which are pretty cool. The overall presentation in both graphics and music is nice, and it's a shame that this didn't end up getting released. But you can play Chalvo's other game that released 2 years later, Chalvo 55 on the Game Boy, which shares some of the same staff, although not the creator. This game's also quite decent, being a puzzle platformer. You may even see it appear on this channel in the future, when I go over my favorite games in the Game Boy library. Vertical Force. Pretty uninspired name for a shmup, but it's hard to fault Hudson for it. Who even knows how many shmups they made up to this point? And here they were tasked with making a shmup on the Virtual Boy. The most unique thing about this game is that you can switch between 2 different heights to fly in. Not super unique because I have seen it done elsewhere, but this of course exists to make use of the Virtual Boy's 3D effects. The power-ups are also cool. You get to have your own little drone you can fly around to help you shoot enemies. Look, this game is fun, however one of the most important things I think in this genre is to have clarity, especially between, the background and bullets. This game unfortunately was put on the Virtual Boy, which consists of red and black. Now you can certainly make this color combination work if you stick to having a black background all the way through while the bullets are red. It'd end up looking real simple and wouldn't be taking advantage of the system's graphical capabilities, but at the very least you'd be able to see the bullets. And I mean, you'd have much better graphics than Space Invaders still. This game unfortunately decides to go with quite detailed backgrounds much of the time, and while the levels themselves are still manageable despite this, I was blasting through this game on standard difficulty, but the stage 4 boss is kinda ridiculous. There's so much going on here. I'd love to be able to keep track of it all, but everything is red. It's also hard to even differentiate between the 2 different layers in this fight, and I think it's clear that developers were very aware of this, which is why your ship has a health bar instead of blowing up in one hit like in most games, which helps to make the fight solvable through trial and error mostly, and knowing what you can or cannot get hit by depending on your height. But even then I still had trouble dodging things, so my strategy became kill the boss before he kills me, instead of don't get hit. To be honest, stage 4 killed any interest I had in attempting the higher difficulties for this game, and I kind of wish this game was basically on any other platform instead. You could definitely get this genre to work if you stick to having a black background, but I think they were maybe a little too ambitious here with the detailed backgrounds in different heights, which might have been able to work if it was instead developed for any other platform. I still like this game, it's definitely a fun time. I know this probably felt negative, but that's because this is a genre I actually care about, and it's a bit painful knowing that this game probably suffers more than any other on this list by being on the Virtual Boy. Oh boy everyone, we've made it to the top 5 now, with another Hudson title, and I think this game really deserves to be here. Just compare this game's presentation with its other versions. It kinda blows them out of the water, even when compared to its original arcade release. The characters in the center are so lively and animated, the moving backgrounds of various different settings are nice, and even just the effects during gameplay like the explosion and text are really well done. And I think it has one of the best soundtracks on the system. This really does the Virtual Boy proud. It's a system very capable of beauty, just in red. And that's why I think people might opt to play the other versions of this game, which have the advantage of color, which I understand is pretty important for the falling block genre. That's why I steer clear of the Puyo Puyo games on the original Game Boy, but I do indulge myself on the Game Boy Color games. But this lack of color doesn't bother me that much in this title. You'll notice in the other versions they have different colored Bomberman heads, but on Virtual Boy you've got 4 different tile sets to choose from besides this, of pretty distinct icons. One unfortunate thing is once again, there is no multiplayer, even though this game is kind of built for it. Seeing as it's a Bomberman game, I think that's one of the big appeals of this franchise, right? Well, I'm not going to pretend that really matters to me because I don't have any friends to play Bomberman with. Also, I guess this is one of my favorite Bomberman games, since I don't consider myself a fan of this franchise, but this is one of the few I've enjoyed. You may see some of my other favorites in a video in the near future. It is pretty funny and unsurprising that Bomberman would find his way on the Virtual Boy as a launch title, seeing as he finds his way onto just about every platform, even Wii U technically, as Panic Bomber was playable on there through Virtual Console. So far, no Bomberman to be found on Switch 2 though. Yeah, he was a launch title on Virtual Boy, the first Switch, but not Switch 2. What the heck, Doug? V-Tetris had one job to get into the top 5 games on Virtual Boy, and that was to be Tetris. And unlike 3D Tetris, it actually accomplishes this, but I don't know who in their right mind was actually going to play this version of Tetris over the versions on Game Boy or NES, which may explain why they didn't bother releasing this outside of Japan. Locomotive Corporation's other 2 games, Virtual Fishing and SD Gundam Dimension War, also didn't release outside of Japan either, so yeah, not the greatest track record with this developer. This game's got the same content as Nintendo's Game Boy and NES Tetris, with the standard A and B modes, and beating level 9-5 grants you the ending. One thing that might bother some players is that the shapes are the same shade of red, when even the Game Boy version offered different shades of gray for its shapes. Most notably though, this game features Mode C, that's right, a mode exclusive to this version of the game, called Loop Tetris, which lets you scroll the playing field left or right for a rotational wraparound effect, but the player can only clear lines and columns that are visible in the playfield. Just like 3D Tetris, I gotta be honest, I don't care about this mode at all. If all this game really needed to be satisfactory were modes A and B. Well, I also would have definitely preferred this to use the classic Russian folk music, and would have liked it to contain the regular Soviet iconography over the, clowns? Red Alarm. This is a game that often gets compared to Star Fox, but they're not really that similar aside from both having a ship you control. This game would have actually benefited by being a rail shooter like Star Fox, with enemies in basic shapes that pop into view, because then it'd be really easy to tell what you're looking at without a 3D environment made of red wireframes all around you. I guess it makes more sense to compare it to Star Fox 2, which does have 3D free roaming environments, but Red Alarm is much more fully realized, so I definitely prefer it over that game. And I would probably prefer it over the original Star Fox 2, if it wasn't on the Virtual Boy. This game was developed by T&E Soft, and while I didn't like their other Virtual Boy games, 3D Tetris or Golf, I am a big fan of the single Game Boy game they produced, Chiku Kaiho Gun's Ass, a Japanese exclusive shmup, and I consider it one of the best games on the system. We're talking a top 20 banger, so I don't think it's far-fetched to say T&E Soft had some experts in this genre, and these 2 games share mostly the same staff. They were already known for developing a lot of 3D games for even platforms like the Genesis, and with the much more powerful Virtual Boy, it's not too surprising they want to try that here too. And so we have the very ambitious Red Alarm, that's kinda got the exact same problems as the 2D shmup I already covered, Vertical Force, being mostly the lack of clarity. This one's just in 3D, and just like that game, it'd be much easier to adjust with strictly black backgrounds, with the enemies, obstacles, and bullets being red. Well, it was really confusing every time I played a new level, and it's even possible to get lost and you might accidentally find yourself backtracking. This game does become good if you learn the maps, and once you do that it becomes kinda simple, but even then it could still be a struggle sometimes, because everything is red lines. Even the stuff that likes to hurt you, but the core gameplay is actually really good. The ship handles well though. It'll take some getting used to with the 2 different D-pads. The left handles your flying direction, which you can maneuver fast if you hold the L button, and the right gives you fast evasive maneuvers. And you can even lock onto enemies like in Star Fox 2, a game that was also supposed to release in 1995, but that didn't see the light of day until much later. And it goes without saying the game has a much better frame rate than either of the Super Nintendo Star Foxes, thanks to the power of the Virtual Boy. So yeah, it actually plays really well and the combat is fun. It is definitely frustrating to get lost or die because you can't tell what you're looking at, especially in the more hectic later levels. And I might have benefited from being less ambitious and simpler like Star Wars Arcade, another wireframe game with much easier action to follow. But that would obviously remove a lot of what makes Red Alarm special, and would have resulted in a much less memorable game. I can't think of many 3D free roaming shmups where you're surrounded by a 3D environment all the way through. It's just a shame it had to be in red and black. Don't say they didn't warn you though, because they did in fact name the game Red Alarm. And here we have Teleroboxer. This game was very close to being my number 1. It's an engaging, fast-paced arcade-style game, similar to Punch-Out, which is one of my favorite video games period, and it provides a big challenge, at least on your first playthrough that is. What I'm trying to say is that this game is very much my cup of tea. It even looks great and honestly made me fall in love with Virtual Boy graphics. This game's clearly using them to the fullest here, and you can't say that about the vast majority of the games in this library. As a concept, it really fits the Virtual Boy as well, being a first-person boxing game that uses all the buttons and D-pads, and the controls are definitely a bit of a learning curve. It'll take you a while to get used to them, and that's where most of the challenge is going to come from at first. I do wonder why this wasn't made as a Punch-Out game. It could be because Yamauchi didn't want popular Nintendo IPs on the system, telling Yokoi to de-emphasize Mario, but it might be that Yoshio Sakamoto, the game's director who released Super Metroid a year before this by the way, really liked making his own original IPs, many of which are still not widely known about, and he likely went with robots in the 22nd century because of the Virtual Boy's futuristic ambitions. The game's design is quite a bit different than Punch-Out's though, and if you approach it in the same way, you're kinda setting yourself up for failure. You can beat the easy opponents by playing this way though, by dodging, blocking, and punching back, but you'll notice your regular punches don't do much damage at all, and these guys throw so many attacks at you that do a whole lot more damage than your punches. And because I approached this game like a Punch-Out game at first, I thought it was really hard, and was confused by comments on the internet claiming that the game is actually really easy once you know what to do. I mean, to even reach the final boss of this game, Milky the Cat, You have to go through all the other opponents without losing once. And this cat is a massive difficulty spike. I don't even want to admit how many hours I spent fighting this guy, which caused the continue count to cap at 99. But I eventually understood what they meant. More than anything, this game is about finding your opponent's weakness. Yes, this is also an important aspect of Punch-Out too, but not nearly to the same extent. This game is like if every boss in Punch-Out was designed like King Hippo or something. But there's really no shortcut if you want to beat dudes like Super Macho Man or Mike Tyson. To do that, you'll need to have mastered the game to a certain degree. While in Teleroboxer, all the opponents have shortcuts. That's why this game can be beaten in 2.5 minutes in-game time, that is. Take this guy Tukikage for example, the second last opponent. I can just move to the side of the screen, which causes him to vanish, and I can repeatedly hit him with my charged up machine gun punches when he decides to show up again. And he goes down that quick. As for Milky the Cat, by far the hardest opponent in the game that took me many hours because I was approaching it like a Punch-Out fight, I just found out how to trigger him to do his upper claw attack, and I could simply dodge it, punch him in the side of the head, rinse and repeat. Yeah, these tricks make these fights feel very one-dimensional, and cheapens the game as a whole, I feel like. I've heard people refer to Punch-Out as a puzzle game, but that is especially true for Teleroboxer, because once you know the solutions of these puzzles, it's not nearly as fun. So I really like this game, and I honestly can't even think of any other standalone Nintendo IP I like as much. It's definitely a perfect fit for the system, but unfortunately it's lacking in longevity. It's a game definitely worth playing through once, but it's not a very replayable title. Maybe it is for you if you find it really satisfying to decimate all your opponents, but for me it definitely doesn't reach the heights of Punch-Out, and it also doesn't quite reach the heights of my number one. And at number 1, to the surprise of no one, gotta give it to Virtual Boy Wario Land. I do think you have to be a bit of a contrarian to not have this in your top 3. Looking at you, Triple Jump, who called this game sluggish because they couldn't figure out there's a run button, I guess. This is the direct sequel to Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land, one of my absolute favorite Game Boy titles. I much prefer the style of Wario game over the direction it went with Wario Land 2 and 3. I think they did find a sort of middle ground between these two styles with Wario Land 4 and Shake It, but for me the first two are my favorites of the 2D Warios. I remember being disappointed with Wario Land 2. I didn't even finish the game when I first played it. Little did I know that the real sequel was on the Virtual Boy all along. From what I understand, people don't like these games as much because they're more traditional platformers with light exploration elements. I say light mainly because all the treasures are optional, but I personally have a real fun time finding and collecting all of them. And I like that it's a traditional platformer. I don't need Wario to stand that much out from the crowd, because to be honest, I like playing as Wario more than Mario most of the time. I like to be able to shoulder charge into enemies, pick them up and chuck them at other enemies, and he's got a crawl, a body slam, and a butt stomp. It took a while for Mario to acquire this move himself. His power-ups are also really fun, like the Sea Dragon helmet that essentially gives him a flamethrower hat, the Viking helmet that lets him stick onto ceilings and create earthquakes by doing body slams, and in this game the Jet helmet has been replaced with the Eagle ability, which allows him to fly really fast. Clearly Wario being slow is just misinformation, and I think anyone can see that he's definitely faster than Mario is in Super Mario Land 2 at the very least. I think even just the standard enemies are more interesting than those you'd see in Mario, as they usually often don't let you attack them head on, due to their weapons and armor you gotta watch out for. This game was also ahead of its time when it comes to its emphasis on being able to play in both the background and foreground, something that would become trendy 2 decades later on the 3DS. It's a short game, but I think that's just fine. Given all the variety in these levels, you really won't know what to expect next, and I will take that over any egregious attempts at padding. But unlike Teleroboxer, the main reason this game is number 1 is that it's quite replayable, given that there are 6 possible endings based on your performance, which is determined by both your time spent playing and the amount of treasure you collected. There's even a second quest with a higher difficulty, different treasures, and a new ending. I don't like everything about this game though, particularly the final level, which is basically a maze, but it's made a lot worse on emulator by being very visually confusing, and the final boss I think is pretty annoying. But overall this was a pretty easy choice as my number 1, and even to this day this remains a top 3 Wario game for me. And that concludes what will probably be my one and only video on the Virtual Boy, so I guess I'll give my final thoughts on the thing. I'm actually a fan. The system allowed for unique experiences compared to what you'd see on Super Nintendo, Genesis, and even in the arcades. With its second D-pad and large detailed high-resolution sprites, it was a perfect fit for games like Teleroboxer. I honestly dig the 2D graphics more than what you'd see on other Nintendo 2D powerhouse systems later down the line, like the GBA and DS. You know, minus the fact that everything's red. Unfortunately though, the vast majority of games that did release were rushed, because they kinda had to be, if they were going to be released on a console with such a short lifespan. And as a result, most of the games did not use the hardware to its fullest by any means. I do think the gamers failed the Virtual Boy to a certain degree, by perpetuating myths about the side effects that aren't really true, but obviously it was Nintendo who really sealed its fate, by being too cautious to release big franchises on the system, which is a shame because I would have loved to see how they turned out, like Metroid I already mentioned, which I think would have been a perfect fit, but I also would have liked to see the scrapped Mario Land, Star Fox, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong Country, and Zero Racers, an F-Zero spin-off, which would have been the first installment to feature 3D graphics. I also really hope more unreleased games like Dragon Hopper get discovered over time. Nintendo may never want to admit that the Virtual Boy was meant to be a Game Boy successor, claiming that it was simply a toy, even though this toy was only $20 less than the Super Nintendo and N64. To me, it's pretty obvious the thing released because the Game Boy was losing steam, with much slower sales and fewer releases, with large developers like Capcom and Konami completely abandoning the system for years. That is until Pokemon came out, and gave it a second life just as the Virtual Boy finished dying, making it a lot easier for Nintendo to figure out where to go next, with this sudden increased interest for their 7-year-old brick that was already outdated the second it released. Quite lucky for them, because I don't know what Nintendo was thinking by channeling Sega or something, supporting 3 consoles at once, with the 4th on its way. But my goal for this channel is to show there is still plenty of fun to be found on any old game console, and this applies to Virtual Boy. The percentage of quality games for the Virtual Boy is actually a higher percentage than most console libraries, and it's pretty crazy to me Nintendo has never bothered re-releasing any of the games, especially when they have a Switch at the Nintendo Museum that emulates the Virtual Boy, but I guess they haven't because they know it generates $0.